What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Plant and Spear Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys are all doing well as spring progresses on. We are in spring football season with practice underway. They just wrapped up their first scrimmage, so in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the news and notes that have come out around spring and the scrimmage. Obviously, as you guys know, I don't live in Tallahassee, so I'm not able to watch practice firsthand, so I will be relying on most of the information that we've heard through the beat as well as coaches and stuff like that. And I'm pretty much just going to kind of give my take and thoughts on it. And obviously, we also know that the spring game itself, not spring game, the scrimmage itself was closed to the media, so it's kind of hard to take a whole lot away from that. But I do feel like, I try and get an episode out for you guys at least every 2 weeks, even when there's not a whole lot to talk about, which is kind of where we're at now. But I want to get something out for you guys. So we're going to talk about that. We have a couple of updates and notes that we're going to get to as well. And then I have a kind of fun topic that was a question posed on social media a while back that I felt like was kind of a good back and forth that would make maybe some good filler content here. And that is, what would be a bigger win in 2023 for Florida State, LSU, or Clemson? So to begin with, hopefully you guys, like I said, are all doing well out there. In a bit of personal news, exciting for me anyway. So I remember telling you guys last episode that Miami was the game that I was shooting for. It seemed like the most exciting home game of a not that great home slate in 2023 for Florida State, which, hopefully they go undefeated at home. That would be really nice. And with the slate of teams they have on the schedule, that is something I'm hoping for. Well, anyway, after that episode, I got to looking around at Miami tickets, and I understand single game tickets have not yet been released, so that will change the prices for what I'm about to say. But anyway, I got to looking at prices on StubHub already, and with those ridiculous fees that they charge that I absolutely hate paying because you just really get nothing for it. But it's almost like having to buy 3 tickets by the time everything is said and done with those ungodly fees there. But anyway, so I got to kind of pricing things around, and being that I was already a Seminole booster and I didn't have to raise my membership level or anything to be able to buy season tickets, I just went ahead and said, you know what, why not? I'm going to do a little something for myself and buy some season tickets. So I did go ahead and order those the other day. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's another way to help support the program and also attend a couple more games, because when you think about it, when you factor in the cost of buying the Miami tickets, and now I'm also going to try and go to the Southern Miss game. And, maybe if I sell off a couple games that I can't go to, because I'm still only going to be able to make probably 2 or 3 games tops in Tallahassee just because it's such a long drive. I mean, really, you're kind of breaking even there. It really is about the same price, because we are pretty fortunate as FSU fans to have pretty fairly priced season tickets, and you can break it into a payment plan and things like that. It's like I tell you guys, it's kind of funny. I go to Georgia, Florida every year with my wife, and a lot of my family members and friends go down there, and we've done some early pricing on those tickets. And currently, I mean, it's cheaper to buy season tickets than it is to buy 2 tickets for that one game. So again, we are pretty fortunate to do that. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's given me another game to go to this season. Maybe I'll sell some off. Maybe I might even do a giveaway. So possibly stay tuned for that. I was going to try for some media passes at some point this year, and maybe we'll see how that goes. But at the same time, I don't know, they probably deny me anyway, but I'm one of them where you can't show your fandom in the press box. So for me, I'd rather be in the crowd kind of mixing it up, doing the war chant, yelling at Miami fans and all that good stuff, having a good time, tailgating and everything. So that's kind of more where my head is at for the season. I don't think I could possibly go to a Florida State game and sit there quietly, or however they do it in the press box. So I'm trying to be in the crowd. I'm trying to do the war chant and mix it up and have a good time. But like I said, I will be at Miami. I will be at Southern Miss, even though I know it's the home opener. And jokingly, I always told myself I promised I would never go to another September daytime game in Tallahassee and go sit in those metal bleachers. Because if you went to the Boise State game, the one that got moved due to a hurricane from Jacksonville, whew, man, that was like a roasting oven. That was one of the hottest games I've ever been to in my life, and it was not a fun experience, especially being the way the game ended. But I'm excited to be back in Tallahassee. I'm just ready for this fall. I got to looking at season tickets, and I got myself all hyped up. And while LSU in New Orleans was fun last year, I actually did not get to go to a game in Tallahassee, and so I'm really excited about it this year because, as the saying goes, there is no place like home, and I just love being in Tallahassee and Doak Campbell on Saturdays when the Noles are playing. So I'm very excited about that. Hopefully we make it to the ACC Championship as well because I will be there and possibly looking at the Clemson game as well on the road. So with that being said, guys, let's just go ahead and jump in. So the first little bit of news, not really anything major, but I feel like it's worth a comment. So today, at the time of recording this on Thursday, not sure when you'll listen to it, 3-star defensive lineman Keyshawn Mashburn did decommit from Florida State. I don't think it was anything really, crazy on either side here. I think really a lot of it is just Florida State is looking to up their level of recruiting. You got a guy here who comes in around 1100th in the recruit ranking, 6'2", 280 pounds, 3-star defensive tackle. And I just think as Florida State's looking to raise that floor right now. They've had some success in recruiting in 2024. They got a top 5 class, and I know Keyshawn's been committed for a little while. So I think Florida State's really just looking to kind of elevate that floor, and that's something that you're going to see as this team becomes more successful and has a little bit more recruiting success, where you have to get those blue chip guys in there. You have to add the 4 and 5 stars. Now, that's not to say that 3-star players still can't turn out to be great players. But I mean, a lot of the times when when there is something to the blue chip ratio, where a lot of the teams that win the national championship have a high ratio of 4 and 5 stars. So I really think that's just really all this is. I don't think he did anything wrong. I think it's just they're looking to up that talent level on the defensive line. And so with that, he does decommit. Florida State will be just fine. I know some people try and act like it's some kind of big deal that Florida State couldn't hold on to a 3-star, but that is not the case at all. I think Florida State just kind of moved on, and we wish him luck wherever he lands. But that's a little bit of news that we wanted to talk about there. Also, as I'm sure you guys have seen, Derek McClendon also jumped in the portal. Now, this one does hurt a little bit because he is a veteran guy who has started experience for you. He was a big part of your defense, but at the same time, and I'm definitely not one of those guys who just immediately starts trashing players as soon as they're not associated with FSU. That is not the case. I think Derek McClendon was going to be part of this defense in 2023, but to be fair, he is not really a game changer. And I believe, he got passed up on the depth chart when you look at a guy like Patrick Payton who's emerging. They brought in Gilbert Edmond from South Carolina who plays the same position. And I think he's just, maybe he didn't take that very well. And that you're going to have that happen at times when you elevate the talent level on a roster. You're going to have guys who at one point were an important part of the plan and now become, maybe a backup or a role player. And they don't like that. And from what I understand, he's someone who thinks highly of himself and thinks he's one of the better players on the roster. And so, to get passed up by a younger guy or a transfer probably didn't sit well. So he's going to go look for other opportunities, and I wish him well, and I thank him for his time in Tallahassee. I will be honest, it's not ideal because Florida State does have a lot of talent at defensive end, but they don't have a lot of depth. And so this does hurt you a little bit as far as depth is concerned. But when you see a guy like Patrick Payton start to emerge, who is a really high-ceiling defensive end, ACC Rookie of the Year last year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, he was already a talented edge rusher. Now they're talking about how he's really developing against the run as well. You know that you already have a first-round NFL type of guy in Jared Verse. They bring in Gilbert Edmond, who has SEC experience but still probably needs some developing. And then you have Byron Turner, who played a few snaps for you last year, not a lot, but that's really about all you got. So they may even have to look at something like going into the portal in the springtime when it opens back up and maybe get some more depth there. Of course, if there's a high-end guy, maybe they could get. They have great success at finding defensive ends in the portal. So it's not ideal, but, it is what it is. It's not the position that you would have hoped to have him for, but it's probably not going to be the last guy either because they still have to get under the 85-man scholarship limit. And, they may even take some more guys in the portal in the spring, depending on what they feel they need. So he won't be the last one to transition. But it's never fun seeing some guys who have significant experience under their belt transition off this roster. But I do think that it does speak to the ever-elevating talent level that we're seeing at Florida State right now. You're seeing not only the talent floor step up, but the talent ceiling as well. So now maybe losing a guy like Derek McClendon, who is a solid college defensive end, but not a game changer, is not great, but it doesn't tank your season or anything like that. So that was a little bit of news there that I just wanted to address. And with that being said, that's part of the spring updates that we're going to get into now. Like I said, this is coming from a lot of the beat things that have been putting out, and we're just going to kind of get into some of my thoughts on them. So we know that they just recently had the first scrimmage of the spring period, and of course there was a lot of starters that did not play in this, and a lot of guys who had on green jerseys. Namely, the number one guy that was not there was Jordan Travis. They held him out. This was done on purpose because obviously, first off, the thing is, when you look at spring as a whole, you don't really need to figure out what you got in a guy like Jordan Travis or Trey Benson or Jared Verse or things like that. Now, you're going to get them experience, you're going to get them some reps in practice, and you're going to work on honing in on some things. But spring is really the time that you want to experiment. This is the time where you want to find out who your second string is, who your depth player is, what these transfers are capable of, what these incoming freshmen are capable of. This is the time to mess around with the lineup, the roster, work on some individual development. This is not where you're looking to gel as a team and get the continuity and get, on the same page with routes as Jordan Travis and things like that. This is the load management part that we talked about in a previous episode as well, where I said one of the things that I was going to be watching for in the spring is how they manage some of these higher end guys and keeping them healthy and keeping them out of harm's way. Because like we said, you know who Jordan Travis is. You know what you're going to get from him. We've already heard throughout the spring that he's been crisp in the practices that he's partaking in. And, regardless of whether you have a non-contact jersey, sometimes guys fall on guys. Sometimes when you're rolling out of the pocket and you got to run or cut away you didn't intend, there's no point in taking undue risk with someone who is this vital to your offense and this vital to your team. So I don't think it's a big deal to sit Jordan Travis out. I wouldn't read too far into it. And to be perfectly honest, you really need to find out what you have behind him. That is really more crucial than getting him these extra reps, because we do know he has been injury prone at some time. So you want to see what Tate Rodemaker can do. You want to see, is A.J. Duffy going to be able to step up and challenge Tate? Is Brock Glenn, who we heard good things about from the scrimmage, is he a guy who might surprise you as a freshman? And so that's really what you're looking for right now with the spring period. So again, that's why you have a lot of guys sitting out, a lot of guys taking it precautionary, and a lot of guys in green jerseys, which also limits what you're going to be able to find out in those practices and in those periods. So speaking of Brock Glenn, he did get a lot of praise out of this scrimmage game, that he got a lot of snaps in, which is really good to hear as a freshman coming in. I mean, we already knew that he was a pretty highly regarded recruit who was originally, Florida State was in the mix with him, and then he committed to Ohio State, who does very well with quarterbacks, and then you were able to flip him back from Ohio State. So it is good to know that you have a guy who, as I like to say, is good clay. This is a guy who has a good work ethic. He is not scared to mix it up as a freshman. He's got good poise in the pocket. From what they're saying, he was live. He didn't have a green jersey on. And to hear early praise for him is good to know, because if nothing else, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot from a true freshman this year. Now, there will be times like in the North Alabama game or something like that where Florida State blows some people out. Even if he were to redshirt this year, you can still play in up to 4 games. So there could be some opportunities where he could see some snaps and you could see him, really under fire in a game situation. But I don't think you're going to want to rely on a true freshman this year. But just knowing that going forward, you have him coming, right behind Jordan Travis, because a lot of people assume Tate's going to be your starter in 2024. And, I don't know that to be the case. It depends on, does A.J. Duffy take that step? Does Brock Glenn continue to develop if he's already showing promising signs as a freshman? But more than anything, not only is he going to push other guys, but now when you look at him and Croman Hawk, however you want to say it, I think Croman Hawk sounds pretty cool, but however you say it, him coming in 2024, I think if nothing else, this is really reason to be excited for FSU fans, knowing that you have a quality quarterback already on your roster and another really high-quality quarterback coming in as well, because I'm really high on Croman Hawk. I think he's going to be maybe the future of this quarterback room, but hearing the good things about Brock Glenn already is encouraging as well. So, going into the future where you have to replace a guy like Jordan Travis, who developed into somebody who is a top 5 quarterback in college football, now you know that the most important position on the field in college football and football in general is in good hands. Now, of course, you got to keep him on the roster and you got to keep him committed, but you feel really good about what you have going forward. And, we've come a long way from, having somebody like Hornibrook and James Blackman and all that battling for your quarterback position, which there's nothing against James Blackman or anything, but you get what I'm saying. The talent level is being raised in that quarterback room, so that is exciting as well. Rodney Hill also got some impressive remarks, which is exciting to hear because I think he's going to get a very large workload. I think he is going to be your number 2 running back for a portion of the season. Now, I'm interested to see what Keziah Holmes is going to do. He does come from a Power 5 program in Penn State, so I think he's a talented back who's going to get a lot of carries this year. But Rodney Hill, we saw really impressive flashes as a freshman. Now, granted, it wasn't against the greatest competition, kind of in garbage time, but you saw the potential of what he could be. Now you give him another year of development, another year in the strength and conditioning programs, and he could be a really great 1-2 punch with Trey Benson. And so I'm really excited to see some early returns on him already in spring coming out, and I think he's going to be very big part of this offense come the fall. And I think he's going to be someone who, they say he's very Trayshawn Ward-esque, and so I think he kind of gives you maybe a little change up from what Trey Benson does. And so I think he is going to be a big part of this offense. Of course, you still have Toafili, who is more of that kind of catch it out of the backfield, gadgety back, who I do think will be. I think all these backs have their own kind of individual skill set, but also work together as a group, which is exciting. Because running back really is like the one position that we're just not really worried about right now. Now, I don't think you can talk about spring football without mentioning Vandravius Jacobs, because he has got high regard after high regard after high regard. And you almost hate to put too high expectations on a freshman, but when they deserve it and they've earned it, I think it's fair to give him, maybe the top performer of the spring so far. And I know they're not done yet, but at the same time, when you hear what everybody talks about, how he's polished already, he seems to just understand the game. He moves very well for a true freshman. And I was watching some clips from practice, even some of like the warm-up and special teams segments, and I kept being like, who is that? And then when I saw his jersey get close enough and I could see his name, I was like, okay, he looks different. He looks like a college football player. Now, granted, his frame is still a little small. I believe he's around 170, 180 or something like that. But, you get him through summer workouts, you get him into the fall, he'll be able to put on a little bit of size. He looks good on film. And so I think he is going to be a part of this offense. Now, again, you go back to a true freshman. I don't know that, say in a pressure situation against LSU or Clemson or something like that, that's going to be your choice to throw the ball. But I do think with Malik McClain hitting the portal, I do think that with Micah Pittman being injured, and we don't know right now whether he might miss 1 game or 1 month of the season. We don't know that. I think that's going to open up an opportunity for Vandravius to now get these reps in practice, which is only going to speed up his development. Of course, you want to still see some things from your 5-star receiver in Hakeem Williams, but again, when it comes to whoever's ready to play, it doesn't matter what year they are. It doesn't matter what star ranking they were. If you're just a guy and you're a dude and you're ready to step on the field to contribute, then I'm all for it. And so far, I think it's exciting to see what he has been able to bring to the table, even as a true freshman. And, when you think about this going forward, like I just talked about, with a quarterback room that has a lot of high upside going forward, now you're hearing about a true freshman receiver already kind of breaking out, and you have 5-star Hakeem Williams, who we know is very talented. He's just, he's kind of got to get acclimated to college. Again, the future looks really bright for this offense, knowing that you have things like these receivers and these quarterbacks coming in. So I'm excited about Vandravius. I can't call him a diamond in the rough because he was a 4-star recruit, but I think he did get overlooked a little bit in high school. So I'm hoping that he does contribute pretty well this year and gets some early development. And I think he's going to be a part of this offense. I think you're going to see him on a regular basis playing on Saturdays for Florida State. So that is an exciting development coming out of spring as well. And I think one of the other biggest things that has come out of practice that I've heard other people talk about so far is really just the overall level of competitiveness that has stepped up since these past few years, where we did hear at times where they almost couldn't even run practice. And a lot of that had to do with the offensive line. The depth players there were just so bad that, you couldn't even run the offense because the defense would just mow over them. And I think now you're starting to see good on good more often. And, as the saying goes, iron sharpens iron. And when you have guys who are better overall, the talent floor and the talent ceiling is being raised, and that's showing in practice, that's only going to pay dividends going forward. Because one thing we often hear players from programs like Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and things like that, one thing we always hear them talk about is how they're so competitive and they have so deep a roster with talent that sometimes when they get in games, it seems easy to them. I would almost be willing to bet that Georgia and Alabama, their second string who their starters go against in practice, or some of the, good on good, I mean, it's probably harder than going up against, maybe starters from Missouri or Arkansas or Vanderbilt or something like that. So if you can get to where your second string at Florida State's level is as good as what you're going to see against Boston College, Virginia Tech, the Dukes of the world and things like that, when you get in a game situation, it's only going to make it easier on those guys. And so I do think that is going to really pay big dividends from what you're hearing about just the intensity level, the battles that these guys are having, and how some of the first and second string guys are good enough now to where you're having some real legit competition. And even some of the guys who, aren't bona fide starters yet, they're guys who can really mix it up and make everybody better. And that's really something that is being spoken to on the offensive line, where you now have probably 10 to 12 guys you feel like that can really contribute. And even if not contribute, they're in line to contribute because they're still young, like a Lucas Simmons or someone like that who's still young but is in line to contribute. So now when you're seeing some of these guys who are even freshmen or, second stringers that are able to really go to battle against these guys who are the starters or projected starters and make everybody better, that only pays dividends for FSU. And so that is going to make this team better in the fall. And so that is something that I think is really exciting to hear come out of spring, is just the overall level of competitiveness being improved. And so with that, just looking at the offense as a whole, they're kind of what we thought they would be so far. I mean, they said defense dominated the first scrimmage, but again, you were without a lot of your key pieces. And I feel like, once you get those pieces back, you'll be fine on offense. Winston Wright was out there again. Now, he was in a green non-contact jersey for some video that I saw, but at the same time, to see him back to running and cutting and catching, that's what you wanted to see from him as a guy who's coming off a lower leg injury. So I'm not really worried about the non-contact jersey as much as I am seeing him be able to run and cut and move. Because getting back to receiver with Micah Pittman having an injury, you're going to need him this year. And he was a dynamic playmaker for West Virginia, and he was someone that we didn't get to see last year. I think he will probably step in and be your starting kick returner if he's good to go. And it looks like he's back to 100%. So, again, another exciting development, just hearing that he's back. He's still got some recovery to do as far as finding his place in this offense. And some, from what I hear, some of the guys say that, it's kind of more of a mental thing with him right now. But, he's worked really hard to get back on the field. So I'm excited to see him get back. Defense has been pretty good, from what we hear so far. Obviously, you lose Derek McClendon, so you got some depth issues at defensive end, and you still don't know if Darrell Jackson is going to get his waiver, which you really need, because when you're trying to compete for what Florida State's trying to compete for this year, as far as ACC championship and national championship potentially, health and depth and honestly sometimes luck is really just as important as a lot of other aspects of the game. You need to be able to compete over the course of a season, not only just win the big games, but you need to have that depth. You need to be able to rest players when they need rest. You don't need to have to play through injury and things like that. So that waiver is still going to be big. Now, they said he has had some really dominant practices, and he's also kind of looked like the guy we saw at Miami as well, which he didn't come in thinking he was going to be a dominant defensive tackle. You thought he was going to come in and be a depth player. You just heard how dominant he was in the first few practices. So you were like, okay, well, maybe we got more than we bargained for. Now, again, they're going to continue to develop him, which is, exciting to know that he has that high ceiling. But it would make me feel a lot better if we knew that his waiver was granted so we could have that extra depth at defensive tackle. Some of the videos you saw of Braden Fisk racing Coach Norvell is, I know it's just a foot race, and he's still in a green no-contact jersey, but it is exciting because a guy that big shouldn't really be able to move that fast. And, Mike Norvell, I know he's got some years on the guys, but he's in really good shape. And so, to see what him racing against Coop, and then now he's kind of getting smoked by Braden Fisk, who threw up a peace sign at him, kind of throwing a little shade on Mike. So I'm sure he's going to be maybe doing a little extra stretches and getting ready for the next race, because he seems like a really competitive guy. But just to see that level of athleticism at a defensive tackle level is going to be really exciting for this year. So the defensive line is really one of the things I'm most excited to see in 2023, because we know how important it is, and we saw how much it hurt this team last year when they had some guys out that were crucial pieces, basically Fabian Lovett. I mean, you didn't really have a whole lot behind him, and when he was out, this team really struggled to stop the run. So knowing that if you can get all these defensive tackles back, maybe they go a few extra heavy sets to hide some of the deficiencies with depth at defensive end and linebacker and things like that. But that is really one of the position groups that I'm excited most to see. Tight ends have gotten some good reviews as well. Kyle Morlock, the 6'7" tight end from Shorter, has already gotten some good remarks, which is good because you were worried about how he was going to be able to transition to Division I football. Obviously, we know Jaheim Bell is a talented guy who is we know he's going to be kind of a jack of all trades in this offense, and we've heard Alex Atkins talk about the different things that these guys are going to open up for them to be able to do. So that is going to be a crucial part of this offense that maybe you didn't have before. And that's no shade at Cam McDonald and what Biscuit was able to do last year, but just having a different skill set and a different level of ability in that room is going to open up a whole nother facet of the offensive game for this team. So that's exciting as well. Brendan Gant has also got some high remarks, which is something that you need, because we know linebacker is, I'm not going to say a weak spot, but it is an area of concern. I mean, you have Tatum Bethune, who played through some injury last year, and I feel like if he's healthy, we know that he was a 100-plus tackler at UCF, so he is a talented linebacker for you. We know Kalen DeLoach is very athletic, and DJ Lundy is also in great shape, which is something we heard last year. But outside of that you really don't have a lot. You got about 4 guys that you can count on. So, anytime you hear somebody able to step up, and, Brendan Gant is one of those kind of hybrid guys who is able to cover as well, I think that's definitely something that is positive news. As far as the secondary, it has been pretty quiet this spring, which is maybe a little surprising, but at the same time, if you're not hearing anything bad, then that's probably good. I know Fentrell Cypress, they said, kind of seemed to struggle a little bit early on, but seems to be coming into his own as camp progresses. This is the guy who was very highly rated as a cornerback transfer, and I think coming from Virginia, I mean, maybe it wasn't against the greatest competition, but he played against ACC teams who he's going to face with Florida State. So at the same time, I know when I looked up some of his stats, they were very good against teams that you have on your schedule. So as long as he can get it together by fall and be the guy that we hope he can be, then that's all you really need, because when you look at him and Renardo Green across from each other, that is a duo that I think you can feel good about. They're going to have to figure out some safety, who's going to be safety on the back end. But you got time to figure that out. And I think the new coaching with Patrick Surtain will help as well. They have been getting some turnovers in practice and things like that. Plus, they're going to be helped out a lot by a very solid defensive line if they turn out to be what we think. So that should definitely play well for the secondary. And I do think the defense will take a step forward this year. I just think you have some new pieces, some new faces that you really kind of got to get settled in and figured out. But overall, I think it's positive so far. One thing that I did hear is kicking is still a little bit of a concern, so that's not exactly great. Hopefully they can figure that out by the fall. Looks like we might be going for it on 4th down a lot again. So overall, like I said, I think it's pretty positive coming out of spring. I don't think there's anything really to be concerned about right now. You just really would like to see the waiver for Dimitri Emmanuel and for Darrell Jackson get granted. Maybe they look to the portal for some help at defensive end and maybe linebacker. But other than that, I think you're pretty good to go. You're just going to see a few more guys have to transition out, which, is part of college football now. It happens. It is part of the game now, unfortunately. But again, it does speak to, like we talked about, that ever-evolving churn of the roster, where some of the guys that maybe were impact players for you before that are now in backup roles because of more talent coming in. Now you see those guys churn off the roster. And so sometimes it may seem like a red flag, but it's actually a good thing. It's healthy to kind of, some of that lower talent level to fall off. And again, that's nothing against those guys, but it's just like recruiting. Sometimes you're going to lose a 3-star, and then a few months later you got a 4-star. So, it's nothing that I would be concerned about right now. Just kind of let things play out. And Florida State still has plenty of talent on this roster. So I don't think any one player, transitioning or transferring out because they got passed up on the depth chart is really going to make a huge difference. It's just for me, I worry about the depth. That's really the one thing I worry about with this team in certain positions, not all positions, but certain positions I do worry about depth. So anyway, guys, with that being said, and of course, as more spring notes come out, we'll follow up some episodes about those. So now I want to get in, without running you guys too long, I want to get into the topic that I talked about with bigger win in 2023, LSU or Clemson. And this was kind of a fun debated topic, depending on which way you look at it. So to me, if you're looking at 2023 in a vacuum, because we know that Florida State will play Clemson every year going forward, and this is probably the last time they play LSU outside of a bowl or playoffs for quite a while. In the vacuum of just 2023, there could be an argument made for both teams. I think as far as just the 2023 season goes, now, of course, let me start this off by saying you want to win both games. I mean, duh, there's no question about that. You want to win both games. You want to beat both teams. I think this is a situation where you look at winning a battle versus winning a war and maybe winning both. So we'll start with LSU. So obviously LSU is to open the season a potentially top 10 matchup. Now I think LSU and Clemson and Florida State are all going to start somewhere top 10, top 15-ish. So I don't think you can put rankings aside because they're all probably going to be in the same ballpark. I doubt Clemson, unless they just stumble out of the gate against, I don't really think they play anybody hard to begin with before they meet up with Florida State. So it should be about the same as far as rankings wise. Now LSU, obviously we know they won the SEC West last year. And they did get kind of, smoked by Georgia by 20 points, but everybody did. But then they beat Purdue 63-7 to, in a blowout win in the bowl game to end the season. Now, they also didn't have Aiden O'Connell in that game for Purdue, who had 500 passing attempts for almost 3,500 yards, and they had to go to a backup who, before that game, had around 30 attempts for 200 yards. So that was a pretty big fall off. So you kind of got to take that into context too. But either way, they won the SEC West, and they ended on a very high note. Really outside of an embarrassing loss to Texas A&M, they had a really good season in year one under Brian Kelly. They returned a lot of talent. They did lose some critical pieces, but they still got Jaden Daniels coming back. They got Garrett Nussmeier coming back. But again, they should be about a top 10 team. Now, I'm thinking that if Florida State is to win this game, you're probably going to get more cachet from maybe the voters, from college football media, for beating a highly ranked team from the SEC West that's viewed on the up and up versus a Clemson team who, while still is the ACC champion, kind of everybody looks as maybe on the downward trend. So I do think that is one factor of why I almost say 2023 in a vacuum, LSU may be a bigger win, because you would be getting that win to open the season, which really kind of validates the hype for 2023 FSU, that we think this team is, they can be who we think they're going to be. If you come out and you beat LSU, that you're going to feel really good about the way the rest of the season is going to go, because now it's year 2 under Brian Kelly. They, like we said, they returned a lot of pieces. But, I also would worry if they lost to LSU, which is why I think this game is doubly important, because you beat them last year in really their home turf. I mean, the Superdome's their home turf pretty much. And now you get them, you're a better team. You were coming off a 5-7 season, so no one really knew what Florida State was going to be in 2022. And you still won that game. You dominated them for 3 quarters. No one gave you a chance. You should have won that game about 35-17 before we let it get close late. So I would worry about the psyche of this team a little bit if they were to drop the game now kind of on your home turf in Orlando, when you should have the home field advantage. You're closer to home. They have the farther trip, and you have the hype of being a good team. Now, so do they, but I would worry about that a little bit. But I do think, like I said, as far as them being an SEC West team, top probably 10 to 15 to open the season, this is going to be a huge game. And I really do think for 2023, this could be maybe a little bigger win for Florida State just for this season. Now, there is the possibility you could see them again in the playoffs. It is possible. So you could avenge this loss because that's something we're going to have to talk about with Clemson. So now turning our focus to Clemson, I think Clemson is one of those where this is winning the war instead of the battle, because this, to me, is your first and main goal. Now, of course, you want to win both games. You want to beat LSU, of course. But FSU as a program really needs to take back the ACC first and foremost. I know, everybody wants playoffs and everybody wants, college football national championship with this team. And I can understand where you might feel a little sold short if you don't accomplish a really high goal with this team, because you're going to have a lot to replace going forward. You're going to have to replace your quarterback and Jared Verse and probably Robert Scott and probably Johnny Wilson. You're going to have a lot to replace after this year. So you expect Florida State might take a step back. Depends on what's in the portal and things like that. But depending on where your bar is set, I really do feel like Clemson is the more vital win for Florida State. Because in my opinion, and while I understand the goal of playing college football is to win a national championship, your first and foremost A1 goal right now in 2023 with this talented team is to take back the conference. Florida State hasn't won an ACC title since 2014. And even though Florida State was on the come up last year and everybody thought Clemson's on the downfall, they still beat you at home and they still went on to win the conference. So you really need to do that. And, if you're able to go on the road and beat them in Death Valley, that's kind of a shot across the bow at Florida State taking the conference back. Because let's be honest, Clemson really is your biggest conference rival. And I'm not talking about rival as in like Miami, like we hate each other. I'm talking about who you compete with as like a heavyweight bout for the conference crown, because we know Miami can't even sniff the conference championship. So, you're talking about who you go back and forth with, who wears the conference crown, who is the top dog in the ACC, and that's Clemson. And so you really need to kind of upset the apple cart. You need to knock them off and take back the crown that Florida State held for such a long time. And this really feels like the year to do it. Now, I wish it was at home, but, if you were going to go up to Death Valley and win, it feels like you have the team to do it. And one thing that a lot of people talk about is having to play LSU and Clemson both in September, which doesn't sound ideal, and I understand that. I don't think it's really ideal either. But I actually kind of like getting Clemson early because we saw in the Orange Bowl, Cade Klubnik looked like a freshman. Now, I understand he's going to have a whole nother season, or off season, should I say, to get in rhythm, to get in sync. I get that. But he looked like a freshman, and he struggled. And I feel like early on in the season, he's still going to be settling in. They have a new offensive coordinator in Garrett Riley from TCU. And speaking of, that's going to give them a little extra cachet going into the season. I saw a graphic the other day. I forget who put it out, but they said that he was the top offensive coordinator, one of the top offensive coordinators in college football. They just brought back Jeff Scott, who got fired from USF, but he was a coordinator, one of the co-OCs during their national championship runs. He's now back as an analyst. So those things do kind of make you look at Clemson and go, okay, well, Dabo knows he needed to make some changes, and he went out and got some pretty good names. But their offense has kind of been hot garbage the last few years. So you just kind of wonder, is it going to be enough for them to take that step forward? You also, which it's been able to do enough, and I know a lot of that's been quarterback struggles, and DJ is no longer there, and Cade Klubnik does have a high ceiling. He is a talented player, but he has not looked that great at times. So I think if you can rattle him like Tennessee was able to do, you can have success against Clemson. You also look at the defense, took a little bit of a step back last year. Now, they're still good, but since Venables has left, they haven't been quite the dominant defense that they have, and they do bring a lot of guys back. But we really don't know which way Clemson's going to head going forward with the changes they've made and where they're at. But it does feel like if Florida State was going to pass them, now is the time to do it. And, of course, I know that on the one hand, it would be huge for Florida State to go up there and beat them. You also have to think about it like this. So Florida State has not won in Death Valley, beating Clemson since 2013, which is one of my all-time favorite games. I'm sure you remember that. That was one of the most glorious moments in Florida State history, the way they throttled Clemson up there. Anyway, so South Carolina did break their 40-game home win streak last year. But at the same time, no ACC team has beat Clemson at home since 2016. Death Valley is a hard place to play. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it's not going to be easy. Now, like we talked about with LSU in the playoffs, you are potentially, with no divisions in the ACC, going to get that rematch against Clemson. If I was a betting man, and sometimes I do, I would bet that Florida State and Clemson play twice this year, once in Clemson and once in Charlotte. Now, it would really be great if you could beat them twice, once at their place and once in Charlotte. But if you were to drop that game, say because Death Valley is just a hard place to win, you still get the ability to avenge that loss and win the conference. Now, obviously, if you had your choice, you wouldn't say, well, I'd rather beat them there, because you want to beat them in Charlotte, because that's the one for all the marbles. That's the ACC championship game. And, of course, you got to make it there. That is a fair point to make. But when we're looking at Florida State as a program and the main goal that they're trying to achieve, that is to knock Clemson off and take back the ACC championship, take back this conference. And, Clemson is the one that's standing in the way right now. So, to me, I think that when you look at just the 2023 season, yeah, I could see the argument for LSU being the bigger win. But when you look at what Florida State's trying to accomplish as a whole, as a program, knowing that that's who you're going to be competing against going forward, I do have to almost lean towards Clemson. And like I said, I think it's a good argument for both teams. I think you could easily say that they're both equally important. I think you would get a little more cachet with the voters, and I understand that that's not maybe how it's supposed to go. But now that you have human college playoff committee, let's just say that LSU wins the SEC West again. I think that you're going to get a lot of positive cachet for beating the SEC West champion again. But beating Clemson would be absolutely massive for this program. So, like I said, guys, at the end of the day, they're both huge, and I really just want to win both of them. I mean, let's just settle the debate and beat both of them. Like I said, I would be a little concerned if they dropped that game, how their psyche would be going forward. Hopefully they can get back on track by the time that Clemson game comes in. And there's a lot of factors. I mean, we'll have to still see how things play out. Is Micah Pittman back for these games? One or both or, whatever. So I do think both are very important in a vacuum of the 2023 season and going forward, because I think if you are able to come out and beat LSU again, that's also going to be really big for recruiting. So I could argue both ways. I just thought it was a fun topic to talk about. And, we'll go ahead and wrap it up with that topic there, just kind of knowing that they're both really big games that are really important. And I think you could afford to maybe drop one and still be fine either way, knowing that you could potentially rematch with Clemson, more than likely rematch with Clemson, and also possibly see LSU again. Of course, that would require them to win the SEC West, more than likely beat Alabama and beat Georgia in the SEC Championship as well. But, you have a lot of those teams that are still, those teams, the Alabamas, the Georgias, and the Ohio States, who are breaking in new quarterbacks where you're not. And neither is LSU. I do say that at the end of the day, I know we're all shooting for, the top of the mountain. But I do think that people really don't need to sell short what it would mean for Florida State coming from 5-7 and a loss to Jacksonville State 2 years ago to be able to say, let's just say hypothetically they had a Clemson-esque season from last year. You go, say 12-1. Maybe you lose to Clemson on the road, but then you come back and you avenge the loss and you win the ACC championship. You go to the Orange Bowl. You get that conference championship. You get that New Year's Six bowl bid. Hopefully they have a better showing than Clemson did against Tennessee, but still, to win a conference championship, to have a double-digit regular season, double-digit win that is, like a 10-win, 11-win regular season, and playing a New Year's Six bowl game would be a highly successful season for this team and this program where it's at right now. So to me, I wouldn't sell short if that were to be the case. But I do think at the end of the day, you just don't want to lose both of these. You need to be able to beat some of these better teams on your schedule. And even if it comes in the form of maybe beating LSU, losing to Clemson, and then beating Clemson in the neutral site game in Charlotte, at the end of the day, that's still a very successful season for Florida State. But you just can't go 0-2 or potentially 0-3 if you were to still play, because you could still lose to Clemson and play him again. You just, you'd have to kind of walk a fine line of not losing too many other ACC games, depending on how the rest of the conference shakes out. But with no divisions now, it would be very possible that Florida State and Clemson are going to be playing twice a year for the foreseeable future until maybe we end up in the SEC or Big Ten or wherever. But anyway, that'll do it with that topic. I just thought it was, like I said, kind of a fun little debate to have, and I don't think I won either side of that. So I think I kind of argued that both of them are very important, and at the end of the day, let's just win them both and be done with it. So the last thing I want to touch on before we get out of here, obviously baseball started out pretty well, and they have recently fallen into a slump. Now, it has been kind of painful to watch recently. They've been throttled a few times, but we do know that this roster, one, is dealing with some injuries, and two, they need an influx of talent. And that is something that Link Jarrett cautioned in the preseason. He didn't take the Willie Taggart approach of kind of hyping his team up preseason year one. He kind of let everybody know this is going to be a process. They're going to have to get some talent in here. They're going to have to do some rebuilding. It's going to be kind of like Mike Norvell did with the football program. You're going to have to take your lumps in year one, and then hopefully with the portal now being a thing for all sports, that they can influx some talent in here rather quickly. He does have a successful record at Notre Dame and his other stops, so I don't think it's that he's a bad coach or anything like that. They just got to get they have to get some talent in here. Two, they need to get healthy. And then another thing that I saw to keep in mind was, I believe it was per Division I baseball, D1 baseball rankings, that Florida State has actually played one of the, if not the hardest schedules in all of college baseball right now, which certainly does not help things when you're kind of getting your feel of the program as head coach in year one. So it doesn't look that great, but hopefully they can kind of get some things corrected and get in better shape going towards the postseason. Hopefully they can make the postseason. With such a hard schedule, I think they'll get a little bit of leeway with some of the losses, but hopefully they can get some guys healthy and get things turned around. And that's kind of where I'm at with baseball right now. It started good. It's kind of in a slump, but I'm definitely not selling stock on Link Jarrett quite yet. Last thing I want to touch on as far as basketball goes, we've been waiting for some guys to hit the portal. Obviously we don't know how the future of the basketball program is going to play out. They definitely need to get some talent in here. They need to overhaul this roster. And we did see that Caleb Mills hit the portal today. Now, he's a player that averaged 13 points per game last season, so that's probably not the one you wanted to see hit the portal. And I'm not sure how successful they're going to be with having a coach whose future may be in question, may not. He's kind of an older gentleman, so we're not sure how well he's going to be able to recruit. And since he lost some of his assistants, that recruiting has kind of struggled a little bit anyway, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But Caleb Mills did hit the portal from the basketball team, and hopefully they can get this thing turned around, because I really would like to see Leonard Hamilton go out on top if it is his last year next year. So with that being said, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Like I said, as more spring developments come out, as more news or nuggets break, we will be back with you with another episode. But in the meantime, as always, make sure to check out plantspear.com. Join us on social media to get in on the conversation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And as always, go Noles.